Hi everyone, my name is Yulyah Baharani and I welcome you to another episode of A Bit of This and a Bit of That. Hello again, we are in 2021 now, and as we are starting a new year, I want to do something I actually have planned since the first time I had thought of making a podcast. And that is a talk on mental illness and mental health. I have always wanted to talk about my struggle and what I learned from going through the most difficult period in my life, but it never came true before. It was simply too difficult to talk about it, and even though I have touched on this topic in the previous episodes, it was still quite hard to solely, talk about this topic. But again, this is 2021, a new year, so, no better way to start the year than to leave a proclamation of winning my battle. It is still an ongoing battle, by the way, but I'm sticking around to keep winning. I am dividing the talk in four parts, four episodes, and every part is a part of the same journey, the same ongoing journey that is my life. So it is basically impossible to divide it or to talk about one thing as a single thing apart from the other things. But to make it a lot easier for me and my poor storytelling skill, I am making it this way. So, this is the part one, and in this episode, I am going to specifically talk about the beginning of everything and the detailed description of what I experienced. So I hope I can do the topic justice, but stay tuned anyway. So, where to start? In short, what happened was I get an illness and it wrecked my life. Not necessarily for the illness, but that single illness, but for so many unfinished businesses for my earlier life, and what followed afterwards in the course of that illness. And in a way, that illness played a role as the opening of a leaked dam. It provided a way, and I was immediately carried and drowned and overwhelmed by the overflowing current. It is quite hard to explain what happened since so many things they kind of happened at the same time, and I was not always sane enough to keep track of everything, especially in chronological order, but I will try my best. Anyway, so in my second year at university, I was living life as usual. I was happy and vibrant with the common young adult problem. I was enjoying life being a teacher to homeless children. Um, I was, involved in some organization. I love going to remote village to teach. Then one day, I began to cough a lot. What alarmed me back then that something was definitely very wrong was my extreme weight loss. I couldn't eat, and if there's something I love, it was eating. So I first went to the clinic at campus, but at the time I was only prescribed medicine for coughing. Then a few days after that, I started coughing blood. Long story short, I went to hospital, went through some tests, all by myself. Then I got the diagnosis that it was tuberculosis. It was a total shock for me because I was living life, very decently. Anyway, I had to start therapy right away, and the shift in my daily life began there. I was not allowed my favorite activity, teaching, and in some ways, there goes one of the things that I consider the purpose for my existence. Um, the therapy for my tuberculosis was only planned for 6 months long, but actually the biggest problem began here. So I was never strong physically, so that tuberculosis became the beginning of so many other illnesses, physical illnesses. From my bowel, I suffered from gastritis in childhood, so irritable bowel syndrome is part of daily life. Then came eating disorder. My respiration system is also weak, so it was like double the problem. Then my high blood pressure and many other things. When I first went through therapy, I tried my best to live life like usual. I remember when I was called to the hospital to get my radiation result. I only then called home. I remember my mom cried, thinking that I have to be at the hospital by myself and, hearing that illness all by myself. But at the time, I was not thinking much about it yet. I was only like, so, so I am sick. But then there's no following thoughts after that. I remember with my printed radiation result in hand, I picked biscuits at a department store nearby and went straight to campus for a meeting. I didn't tell anyone at the time, though it must have been easy to guess something was wrong because I wore mask all the time and I was very visibly thinner, much thinner. But it's not like they could ask me directly. I was not someone who indulge the personal story, and I was not always emotionally available as well. Um, anyway, as days went by with me attending classes and taking medications and going to hospital and all the other stuff, a point where I was hit with exhaustion, physical and mental exhaustion, finally arrived. I find it difficult to tell the story of that period because in my head it was kind of like a jumble, a tangled spider web. But there's this moment I still remember very clearly. It was of me squatting down on a busy alley halfway towards my campus at around 8 a.m. I was trying to continue walking because I got class, and my group had to present our research result, and that was a very important research for me and my group for the class. But my body at the time just did not have any energy to walk. So I clutched my chest. I tried to catch my breath. I tried to hypnotize myself that I could do it, and I began to walk somehow. And at the same time, I was also trying to hide some pink stain on my headscarf by folding the stained parts inside towards my chest. That pink stain was from a little vomit I had while I was down squatting. My medicine was orange and pink, hence the color. Um, I just did not have the time and energy to get back to my boarding house to change. I reached my class thankfully around 30 minutes late, but it was alright since we were among the last groups to do the presentation. I did become the representative of my group to present our research, but I was suddenly stopped in the middle. Apparently, despite wearing a very loose long skirt, I was trembling so much that it was obvious for everybody that, I was not well. That day becomes the day my friends became sure that I was sick. They were already aware that I was not well because I wore, mask all the time and I was very thin at that period as I lost 14 kilograms. And actually, at the time when I had that class, I had actually gained a few kilograms back since I began my therapy. And, you know, it was easy to spot me as someone sick, but my classmates were just never sure of it because I never told anyone. So the first 2 or 3 months, everything went all right. I could still manage my life. Gave answer when people ask about my condition. I opened up again to inviting friends to my boarding room or, going out. I also talked to my parents, ensuring that I'm alright. And actually, in the first few weeks of therapy, I remember my doctor and the nurses were very proud of my result because I quickly gained back my weight. Until at some point near the end of my scheduled 6 months therapy, I can't recall how, but my condition worsened. Um, Again, at the time, the striking change that became my alarm was my weight loss. Despite taking medications that's supposed to give me back my appetite, which has been doing all right in the past few months, I was back to not having enough appetite to eat. I didn't think much of it at that time. I ignored some persistent symptoms until one day I collapsed with extreme pain in my head and in my stomach. Anyway, long story short, I had to be hospitalized. Then I had to start for another round of therapy for more physical illnesses. That physical illnesses can be a topic for another day, though. Let's focus on the mental illnesses now. Anyway, during that second therapy, a much more difficult one and a much more costly one, I was first told that I was insomniac, I had eating disorder, and I suffered from anxiety disorder. To be honest, it was not a surprise when I first had that diagnosis. I had read enough by then to suspect what my symptoms might mean. A few days before I was clinically diagnosed, I crawled from my room to ask one of the housemates in my boarding house, whose room was right across mine, to buy me food because I finally realized I was in dire need of food. And I asked for something with broth at the time because I knew I could only manage liquid. Solid food was a sure case of vomiting minutes later. And that image of me crawling with no energy left in my body and handing money over to that housemate is etched to my mind to this day. I need a lot of time to finally, make peace with that memory. That housemate's name is Gali, by the way. I called her Mbak Gali, and she was an absolute sweetheart. So, Mbak Gali, thank you for that time. Anyway, I didn't sleep for 3 days straight at the time, and before that, I often didn't sleep the whole night and day, and I began to vastly foresee things. I began to be extremely afraid of light, of going out, of people, and of so many other things. This would later develop into a panic disorder. I had my first panic attack on my way to a class. It was an important class, and I was on my way as usual until I had to cross an intersection. And I had my first panic attack then. It was a difficult moment to recall. Actually, I only remember feeling myself hyperventilating and collapsing on a busy road until I was helped by some kind passerby. I completely calmed down after around half an hour and I refused to go to hospital because, I was in great hurry to this very important class. I was basically panting when I arrived at the class because I ran 2 floors up only to be dismissed rudely because I was late. I was an extremely timid person. Everyone who knows me knows this. Imagine this very timid person trying her best to be brave. And, I tried to reason with the lecturer at the time, but again, only to be dismissed with a joke like I was some laughing matter. I was never been as embarrassed as in that moment. That experience really made me it made me see the severity of my condition and how powerful it was to, to be able to wreck my life. I still remember crying my heart out for some long minutes in a secluded part in the campus after that moment. The first time, and I think the only time I had cried like that. It just suddenly felt so difficult at that moment, and I was so scared for my life, for my future, for everything I had planned out. And, in my mind now, as I recall those past experiences, I am fully aware of how that moment had become another crucial stage in my ever evolving mental health problems. That panic attack became another demon for me. I was terrified of the possibility of another panic attack and what it might cost me. I have had a number of panic attacks since then, but the worst one happened in one late night. I had seizure in a pharmacy and I had to be brought to the emergency unit. Anyway, my anxiety got worse. I also developed social anxiety. I was scared of people, of going out. But actually, at the time, I still had the courage to push myself forward, to force myself to go out. I started to develop my own coping mechanism. Like, I had to speak to myself when I go out. Sometimes I walked while quietly reciting a poem or listening to music on my headset. I walked with my head down, my eyes focused on the pavement, because if I didn't do that, then it would feel like I was going to be mobbed. Sometimes it felt like I was naked and, people were staring at me. So I have to focus on the words I said or listen to in order not to hear weird things in my head. It went on for some period, and I managed to barely function with medications. Um, During my struggle with anxiety disorder, I also began to develop a series of new symptoms. I was previously diagnosed with depressive disorder, but something came up and I stopped seeing my doctor when I had used all my prescribed medications. I stopped taking new medications. So actually, at the time, I felt good. I felt relieved. I began to be optimistic again that I was going to be completely healthy. But not long after feeling healthy and optimistic and starting to go out again, I just somehow began to feel like crap again. I felt restless all the time, which I ignored at first, but then I observed that when I heard footsteps or people's voices, I would tremble to the point like I could hear my own heartbeat. And at the time, it struck me really hard that this is something else. It was a real torture back then. I would always have pillows pressed above my head to avoid hearing anything. Even listening to loud music on my headset was not helping anymore. I got rid of my mirror, the mirror in my room. At the beginning, I couldn't stand looking at the mirror and see my very unhealthy self. I hated feeling pity to what I saw. But then I started seeing things on the mirror. I feel watched. I started having nightmares in broad daylight while still awake. There were frequent, insistent flashbacks to some suffering episodes. I jumped and screamed to sounds. I flinched to sudden moves. And I very frequently imagined moves from non existent things. Um, I couldn't cook as well because I always, every time I went to the kitchen, I saw myself performing, scenarios of harming myself and harming others using kitchen appliances. I started seeing reptiles coming through holes to kill me in my room, and I'm extremely afraid of reptiles even now. So I don't know, I began to feel so in danger that I locked myself in my little room with no lights. I never opened the window and I stuffed garments to close the open space between the floor and the door. I couldn't hear ringtones from mobile phones, so I put it on silent. But even then, the sudden, screen lighting up from a call or a message, it would make me hyperventilating. So I just switched it off, which began another problem with my very worried family, who at the time had no idea how to deal with my situation. It was completely messed up. What I saw and heard and felt, and um, how everything felt like they messed with me. Um, Once again, it frightened me, so I began to read. I was desperate to find out what it was. Some of my symptoms resemble symptoms of PTSD, but I couldn't remember anything that could have made me severely traumatized. I mean, yes, I was very sick, but I don't know. I guess in my mind, it's not the same as, let's say, witnessing a murder or being in a war or being a victim of sexual and physical assault. So I was confused at the time. So I again went to a doctor and I was told that I showed positive symptoms of, schizophrenia. And I remember my immediate reaction at the time was, what the F is that? I had come across that word actually for so many times when I read about my condition, like the symptoms I felt. And when I read about mental illness in general, but at that time it was too big of a word that I never was curious enough to find out what it really was. So it felt like a joke when I heard that diagnosis. So I started to become really bitter about life, and bitterness was something new for me. I was never that person before. But I don't know, I guess it's a given to be bitter with all those things going on that I felt, I just didn't understand why and for what it happened and, all other things. Anyway, I started to get therapy again. This time, I got myself all the possible treatments. I get medications and counselings. Um, I was again diagnosed with. I was diagnosed by my psychiatrist with major depressive disorder with psychotic episodes. Now, let's talk about depression. Oh, depression. Um, my depression is a manifestation of many things. That's why when it hit me, it was a huge blow. The symptoms are all the old ones plus the new ones. So I was with anxiety disorder. I was mildly schizophrenic, and I was also very depressed. I was dealing with psychosis that disabled me from functioning normally in my daily life. That's what happened. That's exactly what happened. I can joke about it now, but I still can talk about it as if, telling a short, compact story. There were simply too many things going on, and I was not myself very often. One thing that's really clear about my struggle at that time was how much I was afraid of death. I was terrified by the thought of dying, dying in a condition so much different from where I imagined my life would be at that time and age. My insomnia reached a new level of extreme. I had this funny feeling that if I lose consciousness, I would never get back from it, and that would be the end of me. So I vowed to keep my consciousness even when I should be really resting. It was a horrible feeling. Um, anyway, I had to be prescribed sedatives at the time because I had to take a rest. And I don't know, taking another medications really messed up with me. I felt sorry to my body for having to take so many substances. And ibuprofen was like this daily snacks I took because I was with headache literally every day. like if a few hours after taking my prescribed medications for my mental illness, my head would felt like it's going to burst out, and I would be nauseous. At the time, I had stopped reading, I stopped writing, I even stopped watching movies and even my favorite TV shows. In a way, I had stopped living at the time. I was either locking myself in my room, only get out when I really have to, or, realizing my circumstances and going crazy over that all over again. Um, what's really hard with depression is it causes someone not only the behavioral symptoms but also the physical manifestation of it. And keep in mind, I was already very sick physically at that moment. So, yeah, imagine someone with, pre-existing physical illness, with mental illnesses, with psychosis, and with more physical illnesses caused by the mental illness. Imagine that. At some point, I stopped being so afraid of death and started seeing death as the better option. I will talk more about that later. I want to talk about what happens to someone with mental illness, but I have to say first a disclaimer of some sort that I'm not a doctor. I am not a professional carer for mental health issues, so this is a personal story, what I personally went through, and everything else I learned throughout my struggle from doctors and from books, from internet. I read an awful lot. I watched and listened to all kind of stuff. I was so desperate for answers. It is hard for me to recall and retell things because, things don't start and end in an orderly manner with mental illness problem because some days you are okay and some days you just want to die. And, it goes on like that for some period of time. Um, One thing that made it very hard for me to feel understood is people often misunderstand anxiety and depression, while with schizophrenia, people don't even know, what that is to care enough. Um, Anxiety disorder is not the same as the day by day anxiety over parts of daily life. And having depression is not the same with feeling depressed. That's that's something people really should know, but most people don't know that. They listen to me finally opening up about my condition, but fail to see why it was so hard for me because they also felt down from time to time and they could still function. And in my case, especially with the relapse, my life in the last 5 to 6 years was basically to emerge and relapse and repeat. And it goes on for years, so people close to me find it hard to understand why and how after, all those years of medication, doctor appointment and therapy, I always get back to suffering. I was initially very angry and frustrated that people couldn't understand. Sometimes I wished people would understand just a little bit of it so they should know how it felt. But then, when my anger and pettiness subsided, I realized I didn't want to wish the same wound and suffering to others. If I want to talk about what mental illness does to a person, well, I understand that it differs from one person to another, and so many things have impact on that illness. But personally, in my case, mental illness left me with anger, so many angers in the beginning. But then, after angers, numbness came. And actually, numbness is, it's probably the most lethal about mental illness. Um, you know, um, I think to be understood better, one should know how my life was before the mental illness. So it never rained much in my life. My life is that kind of life where you just live and nothing, I don't know, nothing major hindrance you from living. But as it never rained much before in my life, when it rained, it poured. That is the best way to describe what happened and its effect. Before that illness, I did knew something was going on. I knew I had many unanswered questions. But back then, my life was too okay for me to notice something. I was the valedictorian in my high school graduation. I got the highest result in my school since I was in elementary school. I spent my school years with list of achievements. I was the weird child in my family and the non-fun member of my extended family. But I was also the pride and joy of many. I often became the topic of talk, not only within my family, but in my neighborhood and in my school. Then one day, that comfortable life took a shift. The life I had planned out shattered, just like that. People started throwing out questions. Everybody seemed to have this sort of expectation that I would do something great one day. But not only I didn't do that, I went the opposite direction. Oh God. I understood people who knew me, they wanted to know how and why and, stuff. And probably it was out of affection, but at the time I couldn't see that. It felt to me, they felt to me as an extreme nuisance, and you know, it only complicated my already complicated state of emotion. I felt totally like a failure. I always prided myself in being very bright. I'm socially awkward, but I am very smart. I have nothing but my brain and hopefully my good heart. But that time, the illnesses, both physically and emotionally, made me think like I had lost all that. So in my mind, I practically had nothing. I was this total mess who only made life hard for herself and for others, who staying for no existent value whatsoever. I was overwhelmed with guilt. Guilt to myself, guilt for disappointing those who see something in me, guilt for not being the one I promised my loved ones to be. I was crippled mentally and in some ways literally. I was crippled by the many questions, the what if, the what went wrong, the how it should have been. And at the time, I was still, in the phase where I was still unable to see reasons. So I had practically stopped living in the inside. Um, During that period, I became obsessed with tragedy, with sad things, watching sad movies, sad YouTube videos, reading sad classics. I kind of forced myself to eat to sadness because I realized sadness is a lot better than hollowness and numbness. Now, the mental illness, it not only made me suffer physically and emotionally, it also made me a subject of misunderstanding. And um, this is another source of guilt that used to eat me up from the inside. Actually, it still does, even today and probably tomorrow. I am extremely nervous for this part of the talk, and but I guess this is the best opportunity to touch on that and hopefully clear up some misunderstanding. The other parts I will talk about in this part will have probably forgotten all about this. But it's one of my unfinished businesses, so I apologize in advance for mentioning your name, guys. I'm doing this to free up some spaces in my heart, and I hopefully can find a way to talk to each of you personally. And to you who are listening and are probably frowning now, what is this person babbling about? Bear with me. I need a sort of forward to start the story. So, I was quite an active student in my faculty, joining clubs and organization, and actually handling quite important works for them. I was very determined to be more vibrant, brighter in university, to escape my comfort of being alone, and to be what most people call an extroverted introvert. I was doing just fine, mingling quite well until mental illness came around. Now, you know, when you are carefully treading your way in a very foreign territory with much larger crowd than you would have preferred, and you have to do it while at the same time dealing with anxiety disorder, mild schizophrenia, and major depressive disorder with frequent psychosis episodes, you simply cannot do all right. And that's exactly what happened to me. I often had my episodes when I was trusted with some works. In the beginning, I could handle it, but as my condition worsened, I just fled and left my responsibility behind. And by the time I was conscious enough to be aware of that, I was overcome with guilt that I just forgot about them altogether. I avoided meeting anyone, I just sort of vanished. And it's made worse by my worsening condition. So, to everyone at KMMTP at that time, I am sorry. I genuinely apologize for what happened, for disappointing you, for making things difficult for you, and for being a bad colleague, a worse friend. Especially, I will mention some names that just pop up in my head now. And I'm sorry, I didn't, I don't ask for permission to mention your name, guys, but Uh, I just want to again free up some spaces in my heart. So, Baochir, her name popped up first. Who else? Masona, Kiki, Norma, Aisha, Basatya. Who else? Everyone, really. I am sincerely and genuinely sorry for what happened to my classmates as well. I'm sorry for not being the best of friend I could try to be. To Mm, to everyone, everyone in my class, to Ando, Wilson, Rio, especially to my close friends, to Kak Mels, Kak Flo, Kak Ipa, to Kak Sels, to Pipi. I'm sorry, especially Kak Mels. I'm sorry. I promise to reach out after this. Hopefully, this talking about this in my podcast would will make me a lot braver to address each and every one of you personally, and to one other person, the one person that is always in my mind, but I am too much of a coward to reach out. My beloved Mades, I am sorry for how I handled things. This is me gathering strength and courage to face the consequences of my choice. But, I love you, and I'm sending you the warmest of hugs right now. And I hope you are listening to this. I hope everyone can have a chance to listen to this. Um, so what happened? Anyway, at the time, my worst relapse to date, actually, that was my worst relapse. It happened, and I was advised by my doctor to stay away from things that could possibly tire me out emotionally. And at the time, I took the advice to the extreme. I cut communication with everyone altogether for a period of time, even to my parents and siblings. I will talk about this period later. Uh, Honestly, I don't know. I don't regret my choice because that was probably what I need back then to be sane enough to see life as something precious, I just wish I had told them my reason and not went missing without any explanation. I wish I had shared what was going on and, asked for their understanding and support instead of going missing and cutting any means of communications. Anyway, during the years with my mental health problems, my life really changes. It affects not only my personal life, my target, my dreams, my ability to function, but also my relationships, my family, relationship with my friends and with human beings in general. I emerged victorious at times. I got my medications, but then the relapse happened. And that cycle went on for several times during the years that I again I reached another point of exhaustion, but this time it was another kind of exhaustion, one that could lose me my very life. I will talk about it in the next part. I guess I had talked enough about what I intended to talk about in the first part of my talk on mental health and mental illness. So I guess that is all for the part one. I hope I did the topic justice, and I hope any of you who are listening can follow my talk. It has been a tiring but liberating time talking about this. In part two, things will be at their bleakest, but at the same time, it's also a turning point where light started to creep in into my life. I will talk about one of the darkest part in a mental illness and mental health journey, and that is suicide. I hope you guys will listen to that episode as well. It's coming up very soon, so please wait for it. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and bye.